Silent Requiem. Lysara Rathmore had always been told she was the last of her bloodline, but she never knew what that meant until the full moon rose and her own shadow moved. The air thickened with the scent of rain and blood. The howling stopped, and then he appeared golden-eyed, broad-shouldered, his voice low as a growl. "You are the last of us," he murmured, "and I will not let you fall." Chapter 1. The Last Leaf of Autumn. The wind whispered through the skeletal branches of the ancient oak, a mournful sigh that mirrored the ache in Lysara Rathmore's heart. Autumn in Silver Creek was always a bittersweet affair, a vibrant tapestry of crimson and gold slowly fading to the muted grays of approaching winter. This year, the melancholy felt deeper, heavier, as if the very air was thick with unspoken farewells. Lysara, at 58, felt like the last leaf clinging precariously to its branch, weathered and worn, yet stubbornly refusing to fall. She sat on the porch swing of her ancestral home, a sprawling Victorian that had seen better days, much like herself. The peeling paint, the creaking steps, the overgrown garden, they were all testaments to time and neglect, a reflection of the loneliness that had settled deep in her bones. Her husband, Thomas, had been gone for 5 years, taken by a sudden illness that had left her adrift in a sea of grief and quiet desperation. Lysara wrapped her worn, knitted shawl tighter around her shoulders, the chill seeping into her bones despite the thick wool. The scent of wood smoke from the nearby chimneys mingled with the earthy aroma of decaying leaves, a familiar and comforting fragrance that usually soothed her. Tonight, however, it only amplified the sense of impending change, a feeling that something was about to shift, to break. She traced the intricate carvings on the armrest of the swing, her fingers following the familiar grooves worn smooth by generations of Rathmores. Her grandmother, a woman of formidable spirit and even more formidable silences, had always told her stories of their lineage, whispers of a heritage that stretched back centuries, a bloodline steeped in mystery and whispered secrets. Lysara, practical and grounded, had always dismissed them as fanciful tales, the ramblings of an old woman clinging to the remnants of a glorious past. Yet, lately, the stories had begun to resurface, fragments of memories echoing in the quiet corners of her mind. Whispers of a connection to the land, to the very essence of Silver Creek, a bond that ran deeper than mere ownership. She'd found herself drawn to the surrounding woods, the ancient forest that bordered her property, a place she'd always avoided, a place her grandmother had warned her about, with a strange, unsettling urgency in her eyes. The setting sun cast long, dancing shadows across the lawn, transforming the familiar landscape into something ethereal, almost otherworldly. The air grew colder, a sharp, biting wind that carried the scent of pine, and something else, something wild and untamed. Lysara shivered, not entirely from the cold. A prickle of unease ran down her spine, a sense of being watched, of being observed. She glanced towards the forest, its dark, impenetrable depths now shrouded in the deepening twilight. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves with a renewed intensity, a sound that almost resembled a whisper, a murmur, a voice. Lysara shook her head, dismissing the thought as a trick of the fading light, a product of her overactive imagination. But the feeling persisted, a growing sense of anticipation, of dread, that tightened her chest and made it hard to breathe. She stood up, her joints protesting with a familiar ache, and walked towards the edge of the porch, her gaze fixed on the forest. The shadows seemed to deepen, to coalesce, to move. A twig snapped, a sharp, distinct sound that cut through the rustling of the leaves. Lysara froze, her heart pounding in her chest. It was just a deer, she told herself, a squirrel, anything but what her grandmother's stories had hinted at. But the stories, those fanciful tales, were suddenly not so fanciful anymore. The air grew heavy, thick with a strange, almost metallic scent. The wind died down, leaving an eerie silence in its wake, a silence so profound it felt like a physical presence. And then she saw it, a flicker of movement, a shadow detaching itself from the darkness of the trees. A shadow that was too large, too defined to be anything natural. Lasara's breath caught in her throat. Her hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. The shadow moved again, gliding silently across the lawn, its form shifting, changing, growing. She backed, a soft denial falling from her lips. It wasn't possible. This was not happening. Chapter 2. Whispers of the Forgotten Bloodline. Lasara stumbled backward, her heel catching on the edge of a loose floorboard. She flailed for balance, her hand grasping at the porch railing, the rough wood biting into her palm. The shadow continued its inexorable advance, a dark, fluid shape that seemed to absorb the last vestiges of twilight. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of disbelief that had clouded her mind. Her grandmother's words, dismissed for so long as the ramblings of an old woman, echoed in her ears, loud and clear, infused with a terrifying urgency she hadn't understood until this very moment. The blood of the Holofong runs strong in you, Lasara. Stronger than you know. It is a gift and a curse, a power and a burden. You must be ready. When the moon is full and the shadows dance, they will come. They will seek what is theirs. What was theirs? What did any of it mean? Lasara had lived her life in the realm of the tangible, the explainable. Doctors, lawyers, teachers, that was her world. Mortgages, grocery lists, garden clubs, that was her reality. This was the stuff of nightmares, of folklore, of things that went bump in the night, not the life of a widowed librarian from Silver Creek. The shadow reached the edge of the porch, its form solidifying, resolving into the shape of a wolf. But no ordinary wolf. This creature was immense, larger than any wolf she had ever seen, even in pictures. Its fur was the color of midnight. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural, golden light, burning with an intensity that seemed to pierce through her very soul. Lasara couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. She was trapped, frozen in place by a primal fear that transcended logic and reason. The wolf regarded her with an unnerving stillness, its golden gaze unwavering, assessing, searching. It made no sound, no growl, no snarl, just that silent, intense scrutiny. The scent she had noticed earlier, that wild, untamed aroma, intensified, filling her senses. It was a complex fragrance, a blend of pine needles, damp earth, and something else, something musky, animalistic, and strangely familiar. A shiver ran down her spine, a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the wolf shifted. Not in a way that was physically possible, not in a way that made any sense. The shadows around it seemed to swirl, to contract, to reshape themselves. And in the place where the monstrous wolf had stood, a man now stood. He was tall, powerfully built, with shoulders that strained against the fabric of his worn leather jacket. His hair was as dark as the wolf's fur, a tangled mess of waves that framed a face that was both ruggedly handsome and hauntingly sad. His eyes, those same golden eyes, held the same intensity, the same unnerving scrutiny, but now they were also filled with a depth of emotion that Lasara couldn't quite decipher. Sorrow, yes, but also something else. Recognition? He took a step forward, his boots heavy on the wooden planks of the porch. Lasara instinctively recoiled, pressing herself against the railing, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Lasara Rathmore, he said, his voice low and resonant, a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate in the very air around them. It was a voice that held the wildness of the forest, the echo of the wind, the whisper of the ancient oak. She could only stare at him, speechless, her mind reeling. He knew her name. How? And how had he changed? He tilted his head slightly, his golden eyes searching her face, as if looking for something, some sign, some answer to a question he hadn't yet asked. You don't remember, he said, not as a question, but as a statement, a quiet observation tinged with a profound sadness that resonated deep within Lasara's soul. Remember? Remember what? She had never seen this man before in her life. And yet there was something, a flicker of familiarity, a faint echo of a memory that lay buried deep beneath the surface of her consciousness. A memory she couldn't grasp, couldn't define, yet it tugged at her, a faint, persistent whisper in the back of her mind. His gaze shifted, traveling down her arm to where he noticed the slight tremble. He seemed to contemplate this, a flicker of concern flashing in his eyes. Chapter 3. The shadow that stirred. The concern in his eyes, fleeting as it was, disarmed her slightly. It was a human emotion, a flicker of vulnerability in the face of the impossible. It broke through, if only for a moment, the icy grip of fear that had held her captive. Remember what? She finally managed to ask, her voice a shaky whisper, barely audible above the rustling of the leaves. The words felt strange on her tongue, foreign and yet, somehow, profoundly relevant. He took another step closer, closing the distance between them, but he stopped short of touching her, as if sensing her fear, respecting the invisible barrier that separated them. The scent of him, that wild, earthy aroma, intensified, wrapping around her like a cloak, both unsettling and strangely comforting. "You are the last of the Holofong bloodline," he said, his voice still low, but now infused with a quiet urgency. "The last true descendant of a lineage that stretches back centuries, a lineage bound to this land, to this forest, to me." Lasara stared at him, her mind struggling to process his words. Holofong. The name echoed in her mind, a word she hadn't heard spoken aloud since her grandmother's death. A word that had always been shrouded in mystery, in whispered warnings, in half-remembered stories. "I don't understand," she stammered, shaking her head. "My grandmother, she used to tell me stories, but I thought they were just fairy tales." A flicker of a smile, a brief, almost imperceptible upturn of his lips, crossed his face. It was a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, a smile tinged with a profound sadness. "They were more than fairy tales, Lasara. They were a warning, a legacy, a truth you were meant to inherit." He reached out, his hand hovering in the air between them, his fingers long and strong, calloused and weathered, like the hands of a man who had spent his life outdoors, battling the elements. Lasara flinched, her body instinctively recoiling from his touch, but he didn't move closer. He simply held his hand there, a silent offering, a silent plea. "Your shadow," he said, his voice barely a whisper, his golden eyes fixed on hers. It moved. Independently. Only those of the Holofong bloodline, only those who carry the wolf within can do that. Lasara's gaze darted down to her own shadow, cast long and distorted by the faint moonlight that had begun to filter through the clouds. It lay still, inert, a dark silhouette against the weathered wood of the porch. But she had seen it. She had. It had moved, shifted, danced with a life of its own, just moments before he had appeared. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow, a sudden, overwhelming wave of understanding that washed over her, leaving her breathless and trembling. It was impossible. Insane. And yet it was the only explanation that made any sense. Her grandmother's stories, the strange occurrences, the feeling of being watched, the scent of the forest, the man standing before her, a man who had shifted from wolf to human form, a man who claimed to be bound to her by a bloodline she had never known existed. Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a strange, nascent sense of wonder. He lowered his hand, his gaze softening, the intensity in his eyes replaced by a deep, almost unbearable sadness. "My name's Kalen," he said, "and I am bound to protect you, to guide you, to help you understand what you are, what we are." He paused, his gaze searching her face, looking for any sign of comprehension, of acceptance, of trust. But all he saw was fear, confusion, and a deep, ingrained skepticism. "I know this is a lot to take in," he said, his voice gentle, almost apologetic. "But you are not safe. There are others who know of your existence, others who seek the power of the Holofong. And they will stop at nothing to get it." The air felt heavier, the promise of danger lingering. He took a short, measured breath. Chapter 4. Golden eyes in the gloaming. Lasara wrapped her arms around herself, a futile attempt to ward off the chill that had settled deep in her bones, a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Kaelin's words hung in the silence, heavy and ominous, a threat that felt both real and utterly surreal. Others. Power. Stop at nothing. It was the language of melodrama, of fiction, not of her quiet, predictable life. Power? She echoed, her voice laced with disbelief. What power? I'm a librarian, Kaelin. I shelve books, I help people find information, I organize the annual bake sale. I don't have any power. Kaelin's golden eyes, illuminated by the faint moonlight, held a depth of understanding that both unsettled and intrigued her. He didn't dismiss her words, didn't laugh at her denial. He simply watched her, his gaze patient, unwavering, as if he had all the time in the world, as if he had waited centuries for this very moment. The power of the Holophong is not about magic spells or supernatural feats, Lysara, he said, his voice low and soothing, like the gentle murmur of the wind through the trees. It's about connection. To the land, to the forest, to the creatures that dwell within it. To each other. He paused, his gaze shifting towards the forest, his eyes seeming to pierce through the darkness, seeing things that were hidden from her. The Holofangs were the protectors of this valley, the guardians of a delicate balance between the human world and the other world. They were the keepers of ancient secrets, the mediators between two realms. He turned back to her, his golden eyes locking with hers, holding her captive in their intense gaze. That power, that connection, it flows through your veins, Lysara. It's in your blood, in your bones, in your very soul. You may not have known it, you may not have understood it, but it's been there all along, waiting to be awakened. Lysara shook her head, her mind struggling to reconcile his words with her own reality. It was too much, too fast, too impossible. She wanted to believe him, to trust him, but years of ingrained skepticism, of living in a world of logic and reason, held her back.
But how?
She asked, her voice trembling. How can I be what you say I am? I've lived my whole life ordinary. There's been nothing different about me. Kaelin took a step closer, his presence filling the space around her, his scent enveloping her, that wild, earthy aroma that both terrified and fascinated her. He didn't touch her, but she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, a subtle heat that seemed to penetrate the chill that had gripped her. The awakening is gradual, he said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. It starts with the dreams, the heightened senses, the connection to the forest. The shadow that was the final sign. The undeniable proof. Dreams. Lysara had been having strange dreams lately, vivid, unsettling dreams of running through the forest, of seeing through the eyes of a wolf, of feeling a power surge through her veins, a power that both exhilarated and terrified her. She had dismissed them as stress, as grief, as the product of an overactive imagination. But now, and the heightened senses. The ability to smell things others couldn't, to hear things others missed, to feel the subtle shifts in the air, the changes in the energy around her. She had attributed it to aging, to her senses becoming more attuned to the world around her. But now the connection to the forest. The inexplicable draw she felt towards the woods, the feeling of peace and belonging she experienced when she was surrounded by the ancient trees, the sense of recognition. She had always loved nature, but this was different, deeper, more primal. Everything he was saying, everything he was describing, it resonated with her, with experiences she had dismissed, with feelings she had suppressed, with a part of herself she had never known existed. The sound of a distant howl, lonesome and filled with longing, resonated across the night air. Kaelin's gaze shifted to the trees once more. Chapter 5. Echoes of a Lost Heritage. The howl, mournful and distant, echoed through the stillness of the night, sending a shiver down Lysara's spine. It was a sound she had heard before, countless times, living on the edge of the Silver Creek forest. But tonight it sounded different. Tonight, it resonated with a deeper meaning, a primal call that stirred something within her, something ancient and unknown. Kaelin's gaze remained fixed on the forest, his golden eyes narrowed, his body tense, as if listening for something beyond the howl, something only he could hear. The moonlight illuminated his profile, highlighting the strong lines of his jaw, the sharp curve of his cheekbones, the dark intensity of his gaze. He looked wild, untamed, a creature of the night, a being perfectly attuned to the rhythms of the forest. Lasara watched him, her fear mingling with a growing sense of fascination. She had spent her life surrounded by the ordinary, the mundane, the predictable. And now, suddenly, she was confronted with the extraordinary, the magical, the unbelievable. A man who could shift into a wolf, a bloodline she never knew she possessed, a power she didn't understand.
Who was that?
She asked, her voice barely a whisper, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. Kalen turned back to her, his golden eyes softening slightly, the intensity of his gaze replaced by a weary sadness.
A lone wolf, he said, searching for something. Or someone.
His words hung in the air, ambiguous and unsettling. Was he talking about her? About the Holofong bloodline? About something else entirely? My grandmother, Lasara said, her voice stronger now, fueled by a sudden surge of determination. She tried to tell me about the Holofangs, about all of this, but I didn't listen. I thought she was losing her mind. A flicker of regret crossed Kalen's face, a shadow of pain in his golden eyes.
She was protecting you, he said.
She knew the dangers. She knew what would happen if certain people found out about you. What people? Lasara asked, her heart pounding in her chest. Who are these others you mentioned? Kalen hesitated, his gaze shifting, as if weighing his words, deciding how much to reveal. They are called the Venators, he said finally, his voice low and grim. Hunters. They have been hunting our kind for centuries, seeking to eradicate the Holofong bloodline, to steal our power for their own twisted purposes. Venators. Hunters. The words sent a fresh wave of fear through Lasara, a cold dread that settled in the pit of her stomach. It sounded like something out of a gothic novel, a fantasy story, not her reality.
But why?
She asked, her voice trembling. Why would they want to hurt us? Kalen's expression hardened, his golden eyes flashing with anger, a fierce protectiveness that both terrified and reassured her. They believe the Holofong power is dangerous, he said. They fear it. They covet it. They believe it should be controlled. And they believe they are the only ones who can do that. He took a step closer, his presence radiating a sense of strength and determination. But they are wrong, he said, his voice firm, unwavering. The Holofong power is not meant to be controlled. It's meant to be shared. To be used for good, for balance, for protection. He reached out, his hand hovering just inches from her arm, his touch hesitant, almost reverent. And that's what you are, Lasara, he said, his voice soft, his golden eyes locking with hers. You are the protector, the last of the Holofangs, the one who can save us all. Lasara stared at him, her mind reeling, her heart pounding, her body trembling. She was a librarian, a widow, a woman who had lived a quiet, ordinary life. And now, suddenly, she was being told she was a protector, a savior, the last of a powerful bloodline. It was too much, too fast, too unbelievable. And yet deep down, in a place she had never dared to explore, a part of her believed him. A part of her recognized the truth in his words. A part of her felt the stirring of a power she had never known she possessed. The distant howl sounded again, and the air around her began to crackle with a new energy. Chapter 6. The scent of rain and blood. The howl, closer this time, seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the old house, resonating deep within Lasara's bones. It was a sound of both warning and challenge, a call to arms that sent a shiver of both fear and exhilaration down her spine. The air, which had been still and heavy, suddenly shifted. A cool breeze carrying the scent of approaching rain and something else, something sharp, metallic, and undeniably ominous. Blood, Kalen murmured, his voice barely audible, his golden eyes narrowed, scanning the edge of the forest, his senses on high alert. He moved with a swiftness that belied his size, placing himself between Lasara and the encroaching darkness, his body a shield, a barrier, a protector. Lasara's heart hammered against her ribs. She had never smelled blood like that before. Not in the wild, not raw and untamed. It was a scent that triggered a primal fear, a deep-seated instinct to flee, to hide, to survive. "They're here," Kalen said, his voice low and tense, his gaze fixed on the forest. "The Venators." Lasara's breath caught in her throat. The hunters. The ones who had been hunting his kind, her kind, for centuries. The ones who sought to steal their power, to eradicate their bloodline. The ones who were now here. What do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling, her eyes wide with fear. She felt utterly helpless, utterly unprepared, a lamb facing a pack of wolves. Kalen turned to her, his golden eyes intense, burning with a fierce determination that both terrified and reassured her. "We fight," he said, his voice firm, unwavering. "We protect what is ours. We protect you." He reached out and, this time, he didn't hesitate. He took her hand, his grip strong and warm, a lifeline in the gathering storm. Lasara flinched at his touch, but she didn't pull away. His touch, surprisingly, was grounding, a source of strength in the face of overwhelming fear. "But I don't know how," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how to fight. I don't know how to use this power you say I have." Kalen's gaze softened, his eyes filled with a deep understanding, a patient empathy that calmed her racing heart. "You will learn," he said, his voice soothing, reassuring. "I will teach you. I will guide you. You are not alone." He squeezed her hand, his touch sending a jolt of energy through her body, a strange warmth that spread from her fingertips to her toes. It was a feeling she had never experienced before, a sense of connection, of power, of belonging. "Trust me," he said, his golden eyes locking with hers, holding her captive in their intense gaze. "Trust in the blood that flows through your veins. Trust in the power of the Holophong. Trust in me." Lasara looked into his eyes, those mesmerizing golden eyes that seemed to see into her very soul, and for the first time since this night began, she felt a flicker of hope, a spark of courage, a nascent sense of trust. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know how she would survive this night, but she knew one thing. She wasn't alone. The wind picked up, swirling around them, carrying the scent of rain and blood, a potent mixture that spoke of danger and destiny. The first drops of rain began to fall, fat and heavy, splattering on the wooden planks of the porch, washing away the dust, cleansing the air, preparing the ground for battle. From the depths of the forest, two figures emerged, their forms silhouetted against the faint moonlight, their eyes glowing with a cold, predatory light. They were tall and lean, dressed in dark clothing, their movements swift and silent, like shadows themselves. They held weapons in their hands, long, gleaming blades that reflected the faint light, sharp and deadly. The Venators had arrived. The air crackled between the hunters and Kalen, the man seeming to stand taller as he prepared. Chapter 7. The Pact of the Moonlit Forest. The two Venators moved with a chilling grace, their footsteps silent on the damp earth, their eyes fixed on Kalen and Lasara with a predatory intensity. The rain fell harder now, plastering their dark clothing to their bodies, turning the silver blades in their hands into shimmering, lethal extensions of themselves. The air was thick with tension, a palpable sense of impending violence that made Lasara's breath catch in her throat. Kalen stood firm, his body a solid wall between Lasara and the approaching hunters, his golden eyes blazing with defiance. He held no weapon, at least not one that was visible, but his stance, his posture, his very presence radiated a power that was far more intimidating than any blade. "Kalen," one of the Venators said, his voice cold and sharp, like the crack of a whip. He was the taller of the two, with a lean, angular face and eyes that gleamed with a cruel, calculating light. "We know who she is. We know what she is. Hand her over, and we might let you live." Kalen didn't flinch, didn't even blink. His gaze remained fixed on the Venator, his expression unwavering, his body taut and ready. "She is under my protection," he said, his voice low and resonant, a deep rumble that echoed through the rain-soaked night. "You will not touch her." The second Venator, a woman with short, cropped hair and a scar that ran across her left cheek, let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "Protection?" She sneered. "You are one wolf, Kaelin. We are many. Do you really think you can stand against us?" Kaelin's golden eyes flashed with anger, a fierce, primal fury that sent a shiver down Lysara's spine. "I am not just one wolf," he said, his voice laced with a dangerous edge. "I am the guardian of the Hollow-Fong bloodline, and I will defend it to my last breath." He turned his head slightly, his gaze meeting Lysara's for a fleeting moment. His eyes were filled with a mixture of determination and reassurance. "Stay behind me," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the drumming of the rain. "No matter what happens." Lysara nodded, her heart pounding in her chest, her body trembling with fear. She wanted to run, to hide, to escape this nightmare, but she knew she couldn't. She was bound to Kaelin, to the Hollow-Fong legacy, to this fight. The Venators exchanged a look, a silent communication that spoke of their shared purpose, their shared ruthlessness. They spread out, circling Kaelin and Lysara, their movements fluid and coordinated, like predators stalking their prey. "We don't want to kill you, Kaelin," the male Venator said, his voice deceptively calm. "But we will if we have to. The girl, she is the key. She is the last of her line. Her power, it belongs to us." Kaelin's grip on Lysara's hand tightened, his touch sending a surge of warmth through her body, a reassurance that she desperately needed. "Her power belongs to her," he said, his voice firm, unwavering. "And she will not be taken." He released her hand, his body shifting, his muscles coiling, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Lysara watched him, her heart aching with a mixture of fear and admiration. He was magnificent, a warrior, a protector, a wolf. The Venators lunged, their blades flashing in the rain, their movements swift and deadly. Kaelin met their attack with a ferocity that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. He moved with an unnatural speed, dodging their blows, deflecting their strikes, his body a blur of motion. Lysara watched in horror and amazement as the battle unfolded before her eyes, a violent dance of death and defiance. The rain poured down, washing away the blood that began to stain the wooden planks of the porch, a grim testament to the brutal reality of this ancient conflict. Kaelin began to transform, his form becoming less and less human. Chapter 8. Scars of the Past, Hopes of the Future. The transformation was agonizing to watch, a contortion of flesh and bone that defied the laws of nature. Kaelin's form blurred, his human features shifting, stretching, reshaping themselves into the monstrous shape of the wolf she had seen earlier. But this time, there was a raw, visceral quality to the change, a sense of pain and struggle that made Lysara's stomach churn. He fought with the ferocity of a cornered animal, his snarls and growls echoing through the rain-soaked night, a terrifying symphony of rage and defiance. He was a whirlwind of fur and teeth and claws, a force of nature unleashed, battling the two Venators with a desperate courage that both inspired and terrified Lysara. She watched, helpless and horrified, as the battle raged around her, the porch becoming a stage for a brutal, ancient conflict. The Venators were skilled, their movements precise and deadly, their blades constantly seeking to find their mark. But Kaelin was stronger, faster, his instincts honed by centuries of survival, his power fueled by the ancient bloodline that flowed through his veins. He took blows, his fur becoming matted with blood, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but he never faltered, never yielded. He fought with a single-minded determination, his focus solely on protecting Lysara, on keeping her safe from the hunters who sought to claim her. Lysara felt a surge of emotion, a mixture of fear, awe, and gratitude. This man, this wolf, this creature of myth and legend, was risking his life for her, a woman he barely knew, a woman who had lived her life in ignorance of her own heritage. She remembered her grandmother's stories again, the tales of the Hollowfangs, the protectors of the valley, the guardians of the balance. She remembered the warnings, the whispers, the secrets. And she finally understood. She understood the burden, the responsibility, the power. A strange warmth began to spread through her body, starting in her core and radiating outwards, a tingling sensation that made her skin prickle and her heart race. She felt different, stronger, more alive. She looked at her hands, her ordinary, librarian's hands, and saw a faint shimmer, a subtle glow, emanating from her skin. It was the same golden light that she had seen in Kaelin's eyes, the same light that had flickered in her shadow. The power. It was real. It was within her. And it was awakening. One of the Venators, the woman with the scarred face, managed to land a blow, her blade slicing across Kaelin's flank, drawing a yelp of pain from the wounded wolf. He staggered, his movements momentarily faltering, his golden eyes clouded with pain. Lasara gasped, her heart clenching with fear. She couldn't just stand here and watch. She had to do something. She had to help. Instinct took over, a primal urge to protect, to defend, to fight. She stepped forward, her body moving without conscious thought, her hands outstretched, her fingers tingling with the nascent power that surged through her veins.
No,
she cried, her voice surprisingly strong, resonating with a power she didn't know she possessed. Leave him alone. Her voice, amplified by the burgeoning power within her, cut through the sounds of the battle, the rain, the snarls and growls. The Venators, momentarily startled, turned their attention to her, their eyes widening in surprise, their expressions a mixture of confusion and fear. Kaelin's wolf gaze found her, and for the first time, she saw his own surprise mirrored. The rain seemed to focus around her, guided by an unseen force. Chapter 9. The Gathering Storm. The rain, as if responding to her unspoken command, swirled around Lasara, forming a protective vortex, a shimmering shield of water that separated her from the Venators. It was a breathtaking, awe-inspiring sight, a manifestation of the Hollowfang power that she had only just begun to grasp. The Venators stared at her, their initial surprise replaced by a grudging respect, their eyes narrowed, assessing this new, unexpected threat. They had come seeking a helpless librarian, a woman unaware of her own heritage, and instead, they had found this. A woman wielding the power of the storm, a woman channeling the ancient magic of the Hollowfang bloodline. Kaelin, still in his wolf form, watched her with a mixture of pride and concern. He had known she was powerful, he had sensed the potential within her, but he hadn't expected her awakening to be so sudden, so dramatic. So, the rumors were true, the male Venator said, his voice tight with a mixture of anger and fear. The last of the Hollowfangs, she has awakened. His companion, the scarred woman, remained silent, her gaze fixed on Lasara, her eyes calculating, assessing. She had underestimated this woman, this librarian. She wouldn't make that mistake again. Lasara stood tall, her body trembling with the effort of controlling the swirling vortex of rain, her mind racing, trying to understand what was happening, how she was doing this. It was instinct, pure and simple, a primal connection to the elements, to the land, to the power that flowed through her veins. Leave, she said, her voice amplified by the storm, resonating with an authority that surprised even her. Leave this place and never return. This is Hollowfang territory, and I am its protector. The male Venator let out a harsh, mocking laugh. You are a novice, he said. A child playing with a power you don't understand. We are Venators. We do not fear children. Or their tricks. He raised his blade, his eyes glinting with a cold, predatory light. We will take what is ours, he said. By force, if necessary. He lunged, his movement swift and deadly, his blade aimed at Lasara's heart. But the vortex of rain, now swirling with increasing intensity, deflected his attack. the water forming a solid barrier, protecting her from the lethal blow. The scarred woman joined the attack, her blade flashing in the rain, her movements coordinated with her companion, their combined assault relentless and brutal. Lasara struggled to maintain control, the power surging through her body, overwhelming her senses, threatening to consume her. Kaelin, seeing her struggle, let out a ferocious roar, a sound that shook the very foundations of the house. He launched himself at the Venators, his claws and teeth tearing at their flesh, his body a blur of motion, fighting with a desperate courage to protect the woman he was bound to. The battle raged, a chaotic melee of rain, blood, and magic, a struggle for survival, a clash of ancient powers. Lasara, caught in the middle of this storm, fought with a newfound strength, a primal determination, a fierce protectiveness. She was no longer just a librarian. She was no longer just a widow. She was a Holofong, and she would defend her heritage, her land, her life. The rain formed a sharp edge, controlled by Lasara's growing powers, and began to drive back the surprised Venators. Chapter 10. Secrets in the Silverlight. The rain, now a weapon in Lasara's hands, lashed out at the Venators, driving them back, forcing them to retreat from the porch, their arrogance replaced by a grudging respect, their confidence shattered by this unexpected display of power. They stumbled back, their dark clothing soaked and clinging to their bodies, their blades dripping with a mixture of rain and blood. Kaelin, still in his wolf form, stood beside Lasara, his body tense and watchful, his golden eyes scanning the surrounding forest, alert for any further threat. He was wounded, his fur matted with blood, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but his spirit remained unbroken, his determination to protect her unwavering. Lasara, exhausted but exhilarated, lowered her hands, the swirling vortex of rain gradually dissipating, the storm subsiding, leaving behind a silence that was both profound and unsettling. She felt drained, her body trembling with the effort of controlling the power that had surged through her, but she also felt alive, empowered, connected to something ancient and profound. The Venators, battered and bruised, regrouped at the edge of the forest, their eyes fixed on Lasara and Kaelin, their expressions a mixture of anger, frustration, and fear. They had underestimated her. They had underestimated them both, and they had paid the price. "This isn't over," the male Venator said, his voice hoarse and strained, his gaze filled with a cold, burning hatred. "We will be back, and we will finish what we started." He turned and vanished into the darkness of the forest, his companion following close behind, their retreat swift and silent, like shadows melting into the night. Lasara watched them go, her heart pounding in her chest, her body trembling with a mixture of relief and apprehension. She knew this was just the beginning, a temporary reprieve, a brief respite in a war that had been raging for centuries. Kaelin, sensing her fear, nudged her gently with his head, his warm breath brushing against her cheek, a silent reassurance, a gesture of comfort and support. He shifted then, the transformation back to human form as painful and unsettling as the first, his body contorting, his bones cracking, his muscles reshaping themselves. He stood before her, naked and vulnerable, his body covered in cuts and bruises, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of pain and relief. He looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped, his head bowed, but there was also a strength in his stance, a resilience in his gaze, that reassured her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough and strained, his concern evident in his tone. Lasara nodded, her voice still caught in her throat. She was far from all right. Her world had been turned upside down, her life irrevocably changed, but she was alive. And she was different. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. "You saved my life." Kaelin reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, his touch surprisingly gentle, considering his rugged appearance. "I told you," he said, his voice soft, his golden eyes locking with hers. "I am bound to protect you. It is my duty, my purpose." He looked down at his numerous injuries. The rain had washed away most of the blood, but the wounds were still evident. He would heal, she knew, but it would take time. Lasara's new connection to the elements allowed her to perceive an ancient, hidden glade nearby, radiating a healing energy, a secret known only to those of the Holofong bloodline. It was a place of power, a place of refuge, a place where secrets were revealed. "There's a place," she said, her voice stronger now, fueled by a newfound confidence, a nascent understanding of her own power. "Nearby. A safe place. We need to go there." The glimmer of knowledge in her eyes told Kaelin what he wanted to know. She was starting to understand her heritage. Chapter 11. The Howl That Pierced the Silence. Kaelin looked at her, his golden eyes searching her face, seeing the newfound knowledge, the dawning understanding, the nascent power that shimmered beneath her skin. He nodded, a slow, deliberate movement, a silent acknowledgement of her growing connection to the Holofong legacy. "Lead the way," he said, his voice still rough, but filled with a quiet respect, a subtle shift in their dynamic. He was no longer just her protector, her guide, he was also her follower. Lasara turned and walked towards the forest, her steps hesitant at first, but gaining confidence with each stride. She moved with a newfound grace, a subtle awareness of her surroundings, her senses heightened, attuned to the whispers of the wind, the rustling of the leaves, the subtle sense of the night. The forest, which had once seemed dark and menacing, now felt welcoming, familiar, a place of refuge, a place of power. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting long, dancing shadows, illuminating her path, guiding her towards the hidden glade she had sensed, the secret sanctuary of the Holofangs. Kaelin followed close behind, his movements silent and watchful, his body still tense, alert for any further threat. He was wounded, exhausted, but his determination to protect her remained unwavering, his loyalty absolute, his connection to her deepening. As they walked deeper into the forest, the air grew cooler, the silence more profound, broken only by the soft rustling of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. The scent of pine and damp earth intensified, mingling with the faint, lingering aroma of blood, a reminder of the battle they had just fought, the danger they had faced. Lasara felt a strange sense of peace settle over her, a calming of her racing heart, a soothing of her frayed nerves. The forest was embracing her, welcoming her, drawing her into its ancient embrace, sharing its secrets, revealing its power. She reached the glade, a small, circular clearing bathed in the ethereal glow of the moonlight. A natural spring bubbled up from the center, its waters crystal clear, reflecting the stars like 1,000 tiny diamonds. The air here was different, charged with an energy that made her skin tingle, her heart race, her senses soar. This was it, the place she had sensed, the sanctuary, the place of healing. "This is beautiful," Kaelin said, his voice filled with awe, his golden eyes reflecting the shimmering light of the spring. He had been here before, many times, but he had never seen it through her eyes, through the eyes of a newly awakened Holofong. Lasara nodded, her gaze fixed on the spring, its waters calling to her, beckoning her to immerse herself, to cleanse herself, to heal. "The waters," she said, her voice barely a whisper. They have healing properties. My grandmother, she told me about this place. But I never believed her." Kaelin stepped forward, his hand gently resting on her arm, his touch sending a jolt of warmth through her body, a reassurance, a connection. "Believe it now," he said, his voice soft, his golden eyes locking with hers. "Believe in yourself. Believe in the power of the Holofong." He gestured towards a spring. "Go," he said. "Heal. And then we will talk. There is much you need to know." Lasara hesitated, her gaze shifting between Kaelin and the spring, her mind filled with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She was still grappling with the reality of her newfound powers, the truth of her heritage, the danger that lay ahead. But she also felt a growing sense of determination, a fierce protectiveness, a responsibility. She was a Holofong, and she would embrace her destiny. She walked towards a spring, her bare feet sinking into the soft, damp earth. She knelt beside the water, her reflection staring back at her, a woman transformed, a woman awakened, a woman powerful. She cupped her hands and brought the water to her face, splashing it over her skin, feeling its coolness soothe her burning muscles, its energy seeping into her pores, cleansing her, healing her. Suddenly, a howl pierced the silence, sharp and close, a sound of pure aggression, a challenge that sent a shiver of fear down her spine. The tranquility was shattered. They were no longer alone. Chapter 12. Between Two Worlds. The howl, raw and menacing, ripped through the peaceful sanctuary, shattering the fragile tranquility of the glade. It was close, dangerously close, and it was not Kalen's. Lysara's heart leaped into her throat, the healing waters forgotten, her newfound peace replaced by a surge of primal fear. Kalen, instantly alert, moved with a swiftness that belied his injuries, positioning himself between Lysara and the direction of the howl, his body tense, his golden eyes scanning the surrounding trees, his senses on high alert. "Stay close," he whispered, his voice low and urgent, his gaze fixed on the darkness that surrounded the glade. "And be ready." Lysara nodded, her heart pounding in her chest, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She had just begun to embrace her powers, to understand her heritage, and now she was facing another threat, another challenge, another test. The air grew heavy, thick with a tension that was almost palpable, a sense of impending danger that made her skin prickle and her breath catch in her throat. The silence that followed the howl was even more terrifying, a pregnant pause filled with unspoken threats, unseen movements, unknown dangers. Then, from the shadows, another wolf emerged. But this one was different. This one was not a venator, not a hunter. This wolf was larger than Kalen had been in his wolf form, its fur a mottled gray and black, its eyes burning with a fierce, emerald green light, a color that spoke of a different kind of power, a different kind of magic. The wolf stood at the edge of the glade, its gaze fixed on Lysara, its posture aggressive, its snarl revealing long, sharp teeth, a clear challenge, a territorial claim. Kalen stepped forward, his body shifting, beginning the agonizing transformation into his wolf form, preparing to defend Lysara, to protect her from this new threat. But before he could complete the change, Lysara placed a hand on his arm, stopping him, her touch surprisingly firm, her gaze unwavering. "No," she said, her voice clear and steady, resonating with a newfound confidence, a nascent understanding of her own power. "This is different. This is not a venator." She stepped forward, her bare feet sinking into the soft earth, her body trembling slightly, but her resolve firm. She felt a connection to this wolf, a strange, inexplicable pull, a sense of recognition. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice echoing through the glade, amplified by the subtle magic that now flowed through her veins. The wolf remained silent, its emerald green eyes burning into hers, its gaze assessing, searching, questioning. It took a step forward, its movements slow and deliberate, its posture still aggressive, but there was also a curiosity, a hint of respect. Then, just as Kalen had done, the wolf shifted. Not into a human form, not completely, but into something in between. A creature that was both wolf and human, a being that straddled two worlds, a guardian of a different kind of magic. The creature was tall and lean, its body covered in the same mottled gray and black fur as the wolf, its hands and feet ending in sharp claws, its face a mixture of human and lupin features, its eyes still burning with that intense, emerald green light. "I am Lyra," the creature said, her voice a husky growl, a sound that resonated with both power and sorrow. "And I am here to warn you." Her gaze shifted quickly to the slowly transforming Kalen. Her warning was not just for Lysara. Chapter 13. The Price of Protection. Lyra's gaze, intense and unsettling, shifted between Lysara and the still transforming Kalen, her emerald green eyes filled with a mixture of warning and pity. The air in the glade, which had been charged with healing energy, now crackled with a different kind of power, a wilder, more untamed magic that made Lysara's skin prickle and her heart race. "Warn us?" Lysara asked, her voice steady, despite the tremor that ran through her body. She was learning, adapting, embracing the impossible reality of her new life, the constant threat, the constant danger, the constant need to be ready. Lyra nodded, her movements sharp and angular, her body still radiating a sense of both wolf and human, a creature caught between two worlds, a being that belonged to neither and yet both. "The Venators," she said, her voice a husky growl, her words clipped and urgent. "They are not your only enemy. There are others. Others who seek the power of the Holophong. Others who are closer than you think." Lysara's heart sank. She had hoped, foolishly, that the Venators were the only threat, that defeating them would bring peace, would allow her to learn, to grow, to understand her powers. But Lyra's words shattered that hope, revealing a more complex, more dangerous reality, a web of intrigue and betrayal that she was only just beginning to grasp. Kalen, finally completing his transformation, stood beside Lysara, his wolf form imposing and protective, his golden eyes narrowed, his gaze fixed on Lyra, his growl a low rumble of suspicion and warning. "Who are these others?" Lysara asked, her gaze unwavering, her voice laced with a newfound determination, a fierce protectiveness that was growing stronger with each passing moment. Lyra hesitated, her emerald green eyes flickering, as if weighing her words, deciding how much to reveal. "They are called the Shadowclaw," she said finally, her voice low and grim. "A coven of twisted Holofangs. They have embraced the darkness. They have perverted the ancient magic. They seek to dominate, not protect." Shadowclaw. Twisted Holofangs. The words sent a chill down Lysara's spine, a cold dread that settled in the pit of her stomach. It was one thing to face external enemies, hunters who sought to eradicate her bloodline, but another thing entirely to face her own kind, corrupted and twisted, wielding the same power she was only just beginning to understand. How is that possible?" Lysara asked, her voice trembling slightly. "How can Holofangs turn to darkness?" Lyra's expression hardened, her emerald green eyes flashing with anger, a fierce contempt that spoke of a deep, personal betrayal. "Power corrupts," she said, her voice laced with bitterness. "It twists the heart, it clouds the mind, it destroys the soul. The Shadowclaw, they have succumbed to that corruption. They have forgotten the ancient ways, they have abandoned the balance, they seek only power." She paused, her gaze shifting to Kalen, her expression softening slightly, a hint of regret in her eyes. "And they are led by your brother, Kalen." "Kalen." Kalen flinched, his body stiffening, his golden eyes widening in shock, his growl turning into a snarl of pain and rage. Lysara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her heart aching for Kalen, for the betrayal, the loss, the pain he must be feeling. Brother. A sibling turned enemy. A family bond shattered by darkness, by ambition, by power. "Kalen," Kalen whispered, his voice raw with anguish, his body trembling with a mixture of grief and fury. I thought he was dead." The weight of this new discovery pressed down on all of them, revealing a rift far greater than Lysara could have imagined. The price of protecting the Holophong legacy seemed to increase every moment. Chapter 14. Flames of Resistance. The revelation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, a dark cloud that overshadowed the moonlit glade, casting a pall over the fragile peace they had found. Kalen's brother. A twisted Holophong. The leader of the Shadowclaw. The enemy within. Lysara watched Kalen, her heart aching for him, her mind reeling from this new, devastating twist. He stood there, his wolf form still and silent, his golden eyes clouded with pain, his body trembling with a mixture of grief, rage, and betrayal. He looked broken, defeated, the weight of this revelation crushing him, shattering the last vestiges of his hope. I don't understand, Lysara said, her voice soft, her hand reaching out to him, offering comfort, support, a connection in this moment of shared pain. How could he survive? You said you thought he was dead. Kalen turned to her, his golden eyes filled with a deep, unbearable sadness, a pain that resonated deep within Lasara's soul. He shifted back to his human form, the transformation slow and agonizing, his body contorting, his bones cracking, his muscles reshaping themselves. He stood before her, naked and vulnerable, his body covered in scars, both old and new, a testament to the battles he had fought, the losses he had endured. His expression was haunted, his gaze distant, his voice raw with anguish. "We were separated," he said, his voice barely a whisper, his words fragmented, his memories painful and fragmented. "Years ago, during a Venator attack, I saw him fall. I saw him taken. I believed he was dead." He shook his head, his dark hair falling across his face, obscuring his eyes, hiding his pain. "But I was wrong," he said, his voice laced with bitterness, with self-reproach. "He survived. And he changed. He became something else. Something dark. Something evil." Lasara placed a hand on his arm, her touch gentle, reassuring, her presence a grounding force in this moment of turmoil. "It's not your fault," she said, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. "You didn't know. You couldn't have known." Kalen looked at her, his golden eyes searching her face, seeking solace, seeking understanding, seeking hope. He found it in her gaze, in her touch, in her words, a flicker of light in the overwhelming darkness that threatened to consume him. "He wants the power," Lyra said, her voice breaking the silence, her emerald green eyes fixed on Kalen, her expression grim, her warning urgent. "He wants the Holofong legacy. He wants Lasara." Lasara's heart skipped a beat. She was the target, the prize, the key to unlocking the full potential of the Holofong power. She was the last of her line, the one who could save them all, or destroy them all. "We have to fight," Lasara said, her voice surprisingly strong, resonating with a newfound determination, a fierce protectiveness that had been ignited within her. "We have to stop him. We have to protect what is ours." Kalen nodded, his gaze hardening, his golden eyes flashing with a renewed resolve, a spark of defiance that had been rekindled by her words, by her strength, by her belief in him. He looked to Lyra. The shared bloodline, the same path they had taken to be in that moment, it did something. It strengthened a bond, a temporary alliance, a glimmer of hope. "We will fight together," Kalen declared. The forest around them, as if responding to his words, stirred. The leaves rustled, catching flame like sparks of light and dancing like embers. They were not alone in their resistance. Chapter 15. Where Shadows Dance. The embers, glowing with an unnatural, golden light, danced in the air around them, illuminating the glade with a flickering, ethereal glow, a visual representation of the burgeoning power, the growing alliance, the flames of resistance. It was a breathtaking sight, a magical display, a testament to the ancient connection between the Holofangs and the land, the forest, the elements. Lyra watched the display, her emerald green eyes filled with a mixture of awe and hope. She had been alone for so long, a solitary guardian, a creature caught between two worlds, fighting a losing battle against the encroaching darkness. But now, seeing Lasara and Kalen, seeing their combined power, their shared determination, she felt a flicker of belief, a spark of possibility. "The Shadow Claw Lair," she said, her voice low and urgent, breaking the silence, her words focusing their attention on the task ahead, the danger they faced, the enemy they had to defeat. "It is hidden deep within the Blackwood Forest, a place where the shadows dance and the darkness reigns. A place of twisted magic, corrupted power, perverted rituals. Blackwood Forest." The name sent a shiver down Lasara's spine, a cold dread that settled in the pit of her stomach. It was a place she had always avoided, a place of whispered warnings, of local legends, of unspeakable horrors. "How do we get there?" Lasara asked, her voice steady, despite the tremor of fear that ran through her body. She was learning, adapting, embracing the challenges, the dangers, the responsibilities of her heritage. "There is a hidden path," Lyra said, her gaze shifting, her emerald green eyes scanning the surrounding trees, searching for the secret entrance, the concealed gateway to the heart of darkness. Known only to a few, a path that winds through the deepest shadows, the darkest corners, the most dangerous places. She pointed towards a thicket of ancient oaks, their branches gnarled and twisted, their leaves dark and menacing, their presence radiating a sense of unease. "There," she said. "Beyond those trees, the path begins." Kalen nodded, his golden eyes narrowed, his body tense, his senses on high alert. He was ready. He had to be. His brother, his enemy, awaited him. And he would face him. For Lasara. For the Hollow Fong legacy. For himself. "We go together," Lasara said, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering, her hand reaching out to Kalen, offering support, strength, a connection that transcended words, a bond that had been forged in fire, in blood, in magic. Kalen took her hand, his grip strong and warm, a reassurance, a promise, a lifeline. He looked at Lyra, his golden eyes filled with gratitude, with respect, with a shared understanding. "Thank you," he said, his voice sincere, his words heartfelt. "For the warning. For the help." Lyra nodded, her emerald green eyes softening slightly, a hint of vulnerability in her gaze. "We are all connected," she said, her voice a husky growl, a reminder of her own dual nature, her own struggle, her own hope. "We must stand together, or we will fall alone." They turned and walked towards the thicket of ancient oaks, the embers fading, the magical display subsiding, the glade returning to its peaceful, moonlit serenity. But the peace was an illusion, a temporary reprieve, a brief respite before the storm. As they entered the shadows, Lasara felt a chill run down her spine, a sense of foreboding, a premonition of danger. The air grew colder, the silence more profound, the darkness deeper. They were walking into the heart of darkness, into the lair of the Shadowclaw, into a battle that would determine the fate of the Hollow Fong legacy, the balance between light and shadow, the future of them all. The darkness grew, a tangible entity, swirling around them as the path began to twist and turn. Chapter 16. The Unveiling of Truth. The path twisted and turned, leading them deeper and deeper into the Blackwood forest, the darkness growing more profound with each step, the silence more oppressive, the air thick with a sense of menace. The trees here were ancient and gnarled, their branches twisted and contorted, their leaves dark and lifeless, their presence radiating a sense of decay. Lasara walked between Kalen and Lyra, her senses on high alert, her body tense, her hand gripping Kalen's, drawing strength from his presence, finding comfort in his warmth, trusting in his protection. She could feel the power of the Hollow Fong flowing through her veins, a tingling sensation that made her skin prickle and her heart race, a constant reminder of her heritage, her responsibility, her destiny. Lyra, leading the way, moved with a silent grace, her emerald green eyes scanning the shadows, her senses attuned to the subtle shifts in the air, the hidden dangers, the unseen threats. She was a creature of this forest, a guardian of its secrets, a warrior who had walked these paths for centuries, fighting a lonely battle against the encroaching darkness. Kalen, walking beside Lasara, his body tense and watchful, his golden eyes narrowed, his senses heightened, his hand gripping hers, his presence a constant reassurance, a silent promise of protection. He was walking into the heart of his own past, into a confrontation with his brother, his enemy, his own twisted reflection. As they walked, the silence was broken by the faint sound of chanting, a low, rhythmic murmur that seemed to emanate from the very depths of the forest, a sound that was both unsettling and alluring. "The Shadowclaw," Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible, her emerald green eyes narrowed, her body tense, her senses on high alert. They're performing a ritual. A ritual. The word sent a shiver down Lasara's spine, a cold dread that settled in the pit of her stomach. What kind of ritual? What dark magic were they wielding? What twisted power were they seeking to unleash? The chanting grew louder, the rhythm more insistent, the sound more intense. Lasara felt a strange pull, a subtle force that seemed to be drawing her towards the source of the chanting, a compulsion that was both terrifying and fascinating. "We have to be careful," Kalen said, his voice low and urgent, his grip on Lasara's hand tightening, his presence a grounding force, a reminder of their purpose, their mission, their alliance. "They will be expecting us." They continued to walk, the path narrowing, the darkness deepening, the chanting growing ever louder, the sense of menace intensifying. They reached a clearing, a desolate space surrounded by towering trees, their branches forming a dense canopy that blocked out the moonlight, casting the clearing in a perpetual twilight. In the center of the clearing, a group of figures stood around a blazing fire, their bodies swaying rhythmically, their voices raised in the unsettling chant, their forms shrouded in shadows, their faces obscured by darkness. And in the center of the circle, standing before the fire, his back to them, his figure tall and imposing, his presence radiating a dark, twisted power, stood Kalen. He turned, slowly, deliberately, his movements fluid and graceful, his eyes burning with a cold, emerald green light, a mirror image of Lyra's, but twisted, corrupted, devoid of compassion. He saw Kalen, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his face, a smile that was both terrifying and sad. "Brother," he said, his voice a silken whisper, a sound that was both alluring and repulsive. "You have finally come home." The words hung, dripping with a sinister promise. The truth was about to be fully revealed. Chapter 17. The Weight of 1,000 Years. The words, dripping with a sinister mockery, echoed through the clearing, bouncing off the ancient trees, sinking deep into Lasara's soul. Home. A word that should have been filled with warmth, with comfort, with love. But from Kalen's lips, it sounded like a threat, a curse, a desecration. Kalen stiffened, his body trembling with a mixture of rage, grief, and recognition. He stepped forward, his golden eyes blazing with defiance, his hand still gripping Lasara's, his presence a shield, a protector, a brother facing his twisted reflection. "This is not your home, Kalen," Kalen said, his voice raw with emotion, his words laced with a pain that resonated deep within Lasara's heart. "This is a perversion, a corruption of everything we were taught to protect." Kalen laughed, a cold, harsh sound that sent shivers down Lasara's spine. He spread his arms wide, gesturing towards the chanting figures, the blazing fire, the desolate clearing, the darkness that surrounded them. "This is power, brother," Kalen said, his voice silken, seductive, his emerald green eyes burning with a twisted ambition, a corrupted vision of the Hollow Fong legacy. "This is true power. The power to shape the world, to control our destiny, to rule." He looked at Lasara, his gaze intense, possessive, his eyes filled with a dark hunger that made her skin crawl. "And she," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, his words laced with a possessive desire that was both terrifying and repulsive. "She is the key, the last of the pure bloodline, the one who will complete us." Lasara recoiled, her body trembling, her heart pounding in her chest. She was the object of his desire, the focus of his ambition, the instrument of his twisted plan. She felt violated, exposed, vulnerable, a pawn in a game she didn't understand, a battle she hadn't chosen, a destiny she was struggling to accept. "She is not yours," Kalen said, his voice firm, unwavering, his golden eyes blazing with a fierce protectiveness, his grip on Lasara's hand tightening, his presence a reassurance, a promise, a lifeline. "She is her own person. She will choose her own path. She will not be used." Kalen's smile widened, his expression mocking, his gaze filled with a cold, calculating amusement. "Choice?" he said, his voice dripping with scorn.
There is no choice, brother. There is only destiny. And her destiny is with me. He raised his hand, and the chanting figures around the fire intensified their rhythm, their voices rising in a crescendo, their bodies swaying faster, their movements more frenzied. The fire blazed higher, its flames reaching towards the sky, casting dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and twist with a life of their own. Lasara felt the power surge through her, a tingling sensation that made her skin prickle and her heart race. It was the same power she had felt in the glade, the same power she had used to control the rain, but now it felt different. Darker, more intense. She looked at Kaelin, her eyes wide with fear, with confusion, with a growing sense of understanding. She was connected to this place, to this power, to this conflict. She was a part of it, whether she wanted to be or not. The Holofong legacy, Kaelin said, his voice rising above the chanting, his words resonating with a dark, twisted power. It is more than just a bloodline, brother. It is a connection. To the land, to the forest, to the shadows. A connection that has been suppressed. A power that has been denied. He looked at Lasara again, his gaze intense, possessive, his eyes filled with a dark hunger that made her skin crawl. And she, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, his words laced with a possessive desire. She is the one who will awaken it. The one who will unleash it. The one who will bring us to our true glory. The weight of centuries, of secrets, of magic suppressed, it pressed down on them all, demanding a resolution. Chapter 18. Heartbeats in the dark. The chanting reached a fever pitch, the figures around the fire swaying wildly, their voices a cacophony of sound, their bodies lost in a frenzy of movement. The fire blazed higher, its flames casting grotesque shadows that danced and writhed on the surrounding trees, creating a scene of primal chaos, of dark magic unleashed, of ancient power awakened. Lasara felt the power surge within her, stronger than ever before, a tidal wave of energy that threatened to overwhelm her, to consume her, to control her. She struggled to maintain her composure, to hold onto her sense of self, to resist the seductive pull of the darkness, the temptation of power. She looked at Kaelin, her eyes pleading, her hand gripping his, her connection to him her anchor, her lifeline, her hope. He met her gaze, his golden eyes filled with a fierce determination, an unwavering resolve, a love that transcended words, that defied the darkness, that empowered her. Don't listen to him, Kaelin said, his voice firm, his words a shield against the seductive whispers of the chanting, the insidious pull of Kaelin's twisted magic. You are not his. You are your own. You control your own destiny. You choose your own path. His words resonated deep within her, a beacon of light in the overwhelming darkness, a reminder of her own strength, her own will, her own power. She was a Holofong, and she would not be controlled. She would not be used. She would fight. She closed her eyes, focusing on the connection to Kaelin, drawing strength from his presence, finding solace in his love, embracing the power that flowed through her veins, the ancient magic of the Holofong bloodline. She opened her eyes, and they glowed with the same golden light as Kaelin's, a light that was pure, untainted, a beacon of hope in the heart of darkness. She raised her hand, and the chanting faltered, the figures around the fire stumbling, their movements losing their rhythm, their voices losing their power. Kaelin stared at her, his emerald green eyes widening in surprise, in anger, in fear. He had underestimated her. He had underestimated them both. He had underestimated the power of love. What are you doing? Kaelin stammered, his voice losing its silken smoothness, his composure cracking, his control faltering. I'm taking back what is mine, Lasara said, her voice strong and clear, resonating with a power that surprised even her. My heritage, my power, my destiny. She focused her will, channeling the power that flowed through her, directing it towards the fire, towards the chanting figures, towards Kaelin. The flames flickered, the shadows recoiled, the chanting died down, replaced by a silence that was both profound and terrifying. The figures around the fire collapsed, their bodies drained of energy, their faces pale and drawn, their eyes filled with fear. They were just pawns, tools, victims of Kalen's twisted ambition, his corrupted power. Kalen stood alone, his figure silhouetted against the dying flames, his emerald green eyes blazing with fury, his body trembling with rage, his power waning. He looked at Kalen, his expression a mixture of hatred and despair. You cannot win, he said, his voice hoarse, his words laced with a desperate defiance. The darkness, it will consume you. It will consume us all. Kalen stepped forward, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. There is always a choice, brother, he said, his voice firm, his words a final plea, a last attempt at redemption. It is not too late. You can still turn back. Kalen shook his head, his expression hardening, his eyes filled with a cold, unwavering resolve. There is no turning back, he said, his voice a whisper, his words a final farewell, a curse. There is only the darkness. He raised his hands, and the ground began to tremble. The darkness pooled, ready to consume them all. Chapter 19. The Reckoning Dawn. The ground trembled beneath their feet, a deep, guttural rumble that resonated through the clearing, shaking the ancient trees, disturbing the silence, heralding the final confrontation. Kalen stood before them, his figure wreathed in shadows, his emerald green eyes blazing with a dark, twisted power, his hands raised in a gesture of defiance. You cannot stop me, Kalen said, his voice a distorted echo, amplified by the dark magic that coursed through his veins. The darkness, it is inevitable. It is our destiny. Lasara and Kalen stood side by side, their hands clasped together, their bodies touching, their hearts beating as one, their combined power a beacon of light in the encroaching darkness. They were ready. They had to be. The fate of the Holophon legacy, the balance between light and shadow, the future of them all, rested on their shoulders. We choose our own destiny, Lasara said, her voice strong and clear, resonating with the power of the Holophon bloodline, amplified by her connection to Kalen, to the land, to the elements. And we choose light. She raised her free hand, and Kalen mirrored her movement, their combined power surging forth, a wave of golden light that pushed back the encroaching darkness, a force of nature that challenged Kalen's twisted magic, a declaration of war. The clearing erupted in a clash of powers, a battle between light and shadow, a struggle for dominance, a reckoning. The ground continued to tremble, the trees swayed violently, the air crackled with energy, the very fabric of reality seemed to tear. Kalen unleashed his power, a torrent of dark energy that slammed into Lasara and Kalen, throwing them back, testing their strength, challenging their resolve, threatening to consume them. But they held firm, their connection unbreakable, their combined power unwavering, their love their shield. Lasara focused her will, channeling the power of the Holophon, drawing strength from the earth, from the forest, from the ancient magic that flowed through her veins. She felt the connection to the land, to the elements, to Kalen, stronger than ever before, a bond that transcended words, that defied the darkness, that empowered her. Kalen, in turn, drew strength from Lasara, from her courage, from her determination, from her love. He felt his own power surge, his wolf spirit awakening, his ancient heritage reclaiming him, his purpose clear. They fought back, their combined power a force of nature, a wave of golden light that crashed against Kalen's darkness, pushing him back, weakening him, disrupting his control, shattering his illusions. The battle raged, a chaotic melee of light and shadow, of magic and will, of love and hate. The clearing became a vortex of energy, a swirling maelstrom of power, a battleground for the ages. Lasara and Kalen fought with a fierce determination, a desperate courage, a love that knew no bounds. They were fighting for their lives, for their heritage, for their future. They were fighting for each other. As the battle reached its climax, Lasara saw an opening, a vulnerability in Kaelin's defenses, a flicker of doubt in his eyes, a moment of weakness. She seized the opportunity, channeling all her power, all her will, all her love, into a single, focused blast of golden light. The light struck Kaelin, piercing his darkness, shattering his defenses, overwhelming his power, throwing him back, breaking his control, freeing him from the corruption that had consumed him. He fell to his knees, his body trembling, his emerald green eyes losing their dark glow, returning to their natural color, his expression a mixture of pain, confusion, and regret. The darkness receded, the trembling stopped, the silence returned. The battle was over. The dawn began to break, casting a new light over the clearing as Kaelin looked up at his brother. Chapter 20. The Final Confrontation of Hearts. The first rays of dawn pierced through the dense canopy of the Blackwood forest, casting a pale, ethereal light over the clearing, illuminating the aftermath of the battle, revealing the scars of the conflict, heralding the new beginning. The air, which had been thick with dark magic, now felt clean and fresh, the scent of pine and damp earth replacing the acrid smell of corruption. Kaelin knelt on the ground, his body weakened, his power depleted, his emerald green eyes, now free of the dark influence, filled with a mixture of pain, regret, and a flicker of recognition. He looked up at Kaelin and Lasara, his gaze shifting between them, his expression a mixture of shame and hope. Kaelin and Lasara stood before him, their hands still clasped together, their bodies weary, their powers drained, but their spirits unbroken, their resolve strengthened, their love triumphant. They had faced the darkness, they had fought the battle, they had won. "Brother," Kaelin whispered, his voice hoarse and strained, his words filled with a profound sadness, a deep remorse, a longing for redemption. Kaelin stepped forward, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of compassion and forgiveness. He knelt beside Kaelin, his hand reaching out, his touch gentle, his presence a reassurance, a brotherly embrace. "It's over, Kaelin said, his voice soft, his words filled with a quiet strength, a gentle understanding, a love that had endured the darkness, that had survived the betrayal. Kaelin looked at Kaelin, his eyes searching his face, seeking forgiveness, seeking understanding, seeking acceptance. He found it in Kaelin's gaze, in his touch, in his words, a beacon of light in the darkness that had consumed him, a lifeline in the sea of regret that threatened to drown him. I was lost, Kaelin said, his voice trembling, his words fragmented, his memories painful and shameful. The power it twisted me. It consumed me. I didn't know what I was doing. Lasara stepped forward, her heart aching for Kaelin, for the pain he had endured, for the darkness he had embraced, for the brother he had become. She knelt beside him, her hand reaching out, her touch gentle, her presence a source of comfort, of healing, of hope. It's all right, Kaelin, Lasara said, her voice soothing, her words filled with compassion, with understanding, with forgiveness. It's over now. You're safe. You're home. Kaelin looked at Lasara, his eyes widening in surprise, in gratitude, in awe. He saw the golden light that shimmered around her, the power of the Holophong bloodline, the ancient magic that flowed through her veins, the love that radiated from her soul. You saved me, he said, his voice barely a whisper, his words filled with wonder, with gratitude, with a newfound respect. Lasara smiled, her eyes shining with tears, her heart filled with a mixture of relief, joy, and a profound sense of peace. We saved each other, she said, her voice soft, her words a testament to the power of connection, of forgiveness, of love. Kaelin placed his hand on Kaelin's shoulder, his grip firm, his presence a reassurance, a promise, a brotherly bond restored. We will heal, he said, his voice strong, his words filled with hope, with determination, with a vision of the future. Together, we will rebuild. We will restore the balance. They all looked towards the rising sun. The final confrontation had been one of hearts, and love had prevailed. A new chapter had begun. Epilogue. The sun rose higher in the sky, casting its golden rays over the Silver Creek Valley, illuminating the ancient forest, bathing the Rathmore ancestral home in a warm, welcoming light, heralding the new era. The scars of the battle had begun to heal. The wounds, both physical and emotional, were slowly mending. The balance was being restored. Lysara and Kaelin stood on the porch of the old Victorian, their hands clasped together, their bodies close, their hearts connected, their love a beacon of hope, a testament to the enduring power of the Hollow Fong legacy. They had faced the darkness, they had fought the battle, they had triumphed. Kaelin, now a shadow of his former self, but a shadow that was slowly regaining its substance, its light, its humanity, sat on the porch swing, his gaze fixed on the forest, his emerald green eyes filled with a quiet contemplation, a deep reflection, a newfound appreciation for the beauty, the peace, the power of the natural world. He was healing, slowly but surely, guided by Kaelin's unwavering support, by Lysara's compassionate understanding, by the enduring magic of the Hollow Fong bloodline. Lyra, the solitary guardian, the creature caught between two worlds, had found a new purpose, a new connection, a new family. She often visited, her presence a reminder of the constant vigilance required, the ongoing battle against the darkness, the importance of unity, of alliance. The Venators, scattered and weakened, were no longer a significant threat, their power diminished, their organization fractured, their ambition thwarted. But Lysara and Kaelin knew that vigilance was always necessary, that the darkness was always lurking, that the fight was never truly over. Lysara, no longer just a librarian, a widow, a woman living a quiet, ordinary life, had embraced her destiny, her heritage, her power. She was a Hollow Fong, a protector, a guardian, a leader. She had found her purpose, her strength, her love. She had learned to control her powers, to channel the ancient magic, to communicate with the forest, to heal. She had become a bridge between two worlds, a mediator between the human and the other, a keeper of the balance, a guardian of the peace. Kaelin, no longer burdened by the guilt of his brother's betrayal, by the weight of his own past, had found redemption, forgiveness, and a renewed sense of purpose. He stood by Lysara's side, his love unwavering, his loyalty absolute, his strength her constant support. They had rebuilt the Hollow Fong legacy, not as a force of domination, of control, of darkness, but as a beacon of hope, of protection, of light. They had restored the balance, they had healed the wounds, they had created a future where the human and the other could coexist, where the power of the Hollow Fong could be used for good, for peace. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Lysara and Kaelin stood together, their silhouettes outlined against the vibrant colors, their hands clasped, their hearts connected, their love eternal. They looked out over the valley, over the forest, over the land they were sworn to